Hey there guys, it's Lee here. Hope you're having a great day. In today's video I'm going to be showing you how I am actually upgrading the actual CPU cooler in the big older junky workstation that we have here. So this machine is actually a socket 775 motherboard. It's an Asus P5W. What we actually did was a Xeon mod, so we actually fitted inside it a Xeon 5450, which is actually a socket 771 CPU, and we put that in a socket 775 motherboard. That's been running okay, but the actual CPU has been running a little hot, in the region of 70 to 80 degrees, and sometimes even higher than that. So what I've actually done is I picked up this CPU cooler from eBay. It's a Noctua heatsink and fan with a 120mm fan on there, and I picked that up actually for £15. So I'm hoping applying this cooler and heatsink instead of replacing the one that's actually the stock one on this, hopefully should bring those temperatures down significantly. So I've already sort of done a benchmark on the stock cooler and recorded the temperatures. What I'm going to do is I'll take you through now fitting the improved, upgraded cooler, and then what we'll do is we'll measure the actual temperature difference afterwards, and yeah, I'll just share that experience with you guys. Okay, so the first thing I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to grab the new heatsink and cooler, which is this one. Just get that actually in focus there. So you can see it's pretty nice cooler and heatsink. You can see my unboxing video for a better overall look at it. So the first thing I'm going to do is just going to kind of offer it up inside the actual casing, and just to see whether I've actually got enough clearance, because I didn't do that ahead of time. So hopefully we should have enough clearance in there. So I'm just going to kind of try and guesstimate. It might be I think it's going to go just about. There isn't really much, really haven't got any clearance anywhere to actually kind of test for that. So I'm just going to start with removing the stock cooler and heatsink. Just have to undo these little twist lock connectors. In the previous time that I fitted these, they did give me a lot of grief by not securing in place properly. That one again still feels loose. That could actually be contributing to our actual cooling issues. It wouldn't surprise me at all if that was a factor. There's a little tug and they should release. Give it a little tug and release. Okay, so that's the actual stock one off. And thinking about what I'm actually going to have to do is going to go with a removal of the actual motherboard from this machine. On newer motherboards you have the cutout on the rear of the actual back plate, so you can get to the actual underside of it. In this case, what it looks like I'm actually going to have to do is on the back side of my panel, I'm pretty sure there isn't a cutout for it. So what I'm going to actually have to do is remove the actual motherboard, unfortunately, which is going to take a little bit longer, but we'll get cracking on that and we'll get the motherboard out, and then we'll be able to fit the new heatsink and fan. Okay, so just on this part here, just in case you're wondering what I'm doing with a ballpoint pen, is there's a little release on the PCI Express slot, and sometimes it's very difficult to actually get through to the actual release once the card is in place, especially a big card like this. So what you can use is a ballpoint pen and kind of get through, and then you can just kind of get to the actual notch, just pop that through, and then we've got that release there. And then we should be able to give the card a little wiggle. It was pretty jammed in there. Oh, it's actually stuck on that other screw head just there. Let's remove that one as well. Just snagging on that side there. Okay, so we've just cleaned up the actual CPU, got all the thermal paste off it. So what I'm going to do now is on the actual new heatsink cooler, there is this bottom base bracket. As far as I'm aware, it already come off a socket 775 system. So this should go straight onto the back and it should fit fine. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to undo this and then do like a test fitting. And then just double check it, make sure it's all as it should be. Okay, so I'm just looking at the actual heatsink and fan. So the way it needs to be done is we need to remove the actual fan first, because if you look on the reverse side of it, kind of down the line here, there's this little spring-loaded screw just there, and then that kind of clamps onto it there. So what we need to do is remove this one, and then there's one kind of obscured by the actual fan itself underneath. So we need to remove the fan as well, and then we can undo these two screws, the spring-loaded ones. So let's do that. We'll just slide the board out of the way for a second. So the actual fan is just kind of clipped on. If you just hold it, you can just unclip this, and then on the other side. And then what it does is on the actual heatsink itself, there's kind of like this hook under this row here, and a hook back under like that. So it hooks on there, like the bar hooks across, and then it clips onto the heatsink. So it's a secure system, but it's also quite simple. So just the other one, unclip that side and the bottom, take that bar off, and then the fan comes off easily. You can see on this as well, it's just got some, it's like I don't know, rubber, I guess, just to help stop vibration and stuff. But now we can actually undo these spring-loaded pins, so one on the front and back, or vice versa. Okay, so now you can see it's a two-piece. So we've got this black piece is the bottom bracket, and then this spar will kind of go over on the top side of the CPU, and then the cooler is going to go on top of that. So I just need to remember the orientation of it all. So we want it kind of in this position once it's actually inside the actual case. And I might actually do another test fitting just before that, to just make sure it is all going to go in as expected. And I'd rather do that earlier than later, so let's do that now. Okay guys, so it appears that we have a little bit of an issue. The cooler is actually too tall for our case. I had one very similar to this, and I was pretty sure it would fit, so I'm guessing either this case is a little bit thinner, or in this case not quite as tall, a little bit shorter from this perspective. But yeah, that's going to be a little bit of an issue. It means either if I fit this, then I'll have to run it without the side panel on, and really for safety and stuff like that, fire safety, I really do need the side panel on. So what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to continue on with the actual build of this. I'll fit it, test it, see how it all works, but then after that I might have to actually remove it, or unless I can kind of come up with some case modification or something, which will mean cutting out the side of the actual panel or something, which I'd prefer not to do. So if you are considering one of these heat sinks and fans, you must check the actual size. Okay, so the actual thermal paste that I'm using is this Phobia HE grease. I used it with the stock cooler and it seemed to be okay, but with the actual stock cooler it was difficult to tell for sure. So that's the actual thermal paste that I'm using. It's highly recommended, so should continue on. So just go with a nice good size knob. That should be about fine. Okay, so we want this heat sink this orientation. Okay, so I think we've got that side just about. That was actually really difficult. Kind of a job you need a extra pair of hands. Okay, looks good. Now let's Okay guys, so that's the actual installation of the actual heatsink and fan. It didn't go exactly according to plan, as is often the case with these things, partly because the actual heatsink is a little bit taller than I originally expected. I could have taken the time to measure it, which would have taken, you know, a minute, and that would have saved me a lot of hassle. So what I'm going to do is continue on anyway. What I'll do is I'll put the actual side panel on, or at least over and cover, and try and restrict the actual airflow as much as possible. So it's not going to be exact replica of the sort of the first kind of test conditions, but it will be in the same sort of ballpark as kind of close as I can get it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to put the actual system back in its original setting as it was before, and then we'll get the system up to our operating temperature, and then we'll check the actual performance of the actual heatsink compared to the stock cooler. In this particular sort of example, I'm not too sure if I mentioned it in the previous section, but the CPU is actually underclocked. It's actually running between 2.7 and 2.8 gigahertz. And that's because of some previous stability issues, but I also had it the same settings in the previous test, so I just wanted to clarify that in case you was wondering exactly why it's running 2.7, 2.8 gigahertz as opposed to 3. So it's just the actual core clock speed is reduced, and the multiplier is 9 times, which is the same. So I was running it at, in the BIOS settings, was 300 times 9 rather than 333 times 9. So I just want to confirm that. So I think the main sort of result here is kind of a with the actual Noctua heatsink and fan, it's kind of a lackluster performance. When I was sort of reading about these and prior to fitting, I thought we was going to get down to about 40 degrees, or maybe 50 sort of tops, in comparison to the stock heatsink and fan, which are running about 75 degrees under the same conditions. So the actual ambient temperature has also dropped down just a little bit by about a degree or so as well, so it's difficult to judge for that sort of margin, but it is a little tiny bit cooler in the actual room, so we should even see even cooler temperatures on the actual CPU, and it's really just not performing. I think the big thing from this particular heatsink and fan is that the actual fan is a 120mm fan. It's not a PWM fan, it's only a 3-pin fan, and it appears that the actual RPM is fixed to a maximum of 1200 RPM, so it's not very high throughput or airflow really. In fact, it's actually very low. A lot of fans will go to 2200, 2500, that kind of thing for the higher performance. So I think what Noctua have really gone here, and you can actually notice it from the actual system itself, is the actual operating noise is much lower. So I think they've gone for a more of a quieter operation setup rather than a performance operation. Obviously, the actual heatsink is performing better than the stock one, and it is much quieter, but I'm a little bit disappointed with the actual performance. I would like to test this heatsink with a different fan configuration and kind of test it with a higher performance fan and see how that works. So that's something that I might do in the future. Okay guys, so we're just about done here for today. It's been an interesting one, so there's a couple of key takeaways from today's video. Hopefully you can learn from a few of my experiences. I won't call them mistakes, but experiences, because that's what this is all about, trying to do different things and seeing exactly what happens, and then as problems present themselves, just trying to work through it and doing the best you can with what you've got. So if you're actually considering upgrading your CPU and cooler and going for a big style heatsink like the Noctua one, or any of the taller tower or brick style heatsinks, before you make that purchase, double check the actual dimensions and see exactly what can fit inside your case before you actually make your purchase. The other big point to consider as well is decide what's most important for you in terms of whether you're looking for something along the lines of more of a performance cooler, or whether you're looking for additional cooling capacity, but also quietness is your thing. Going forwards from this video, seeing what else we can do with it, I think what I'll actually do is that I will purchase a higher performance 120mm fan, and we will actually test it on this heatsink, the Noctua heatsink, and I'd like to see the actual performance of how that goes. So if I get like a 2200 RPM 120mm fan, I'd like to compare that performance and see exactly how that performs in comparison to this one. This one is really designed for a much quieter operation. The actual RPM is only between 11 and 1200, so it's a really quiet operation, but that's also reflected in the actual performance of the cooler. I was a little bit disappointed by it. I really thought we'd kind of get much better results from it. I have a Zalman, a very similar Zalman heatsink and fan configuration on my home system, and that seems to perform much better, but I think it's because of the actual higher RPM of the actual fan rather than so much of the actual design of the heatsink. They have probably similar surface area, so I think the actual on the heatsink basis they probably have a similar kind of cooling capacity, but with the home system I think that extra throughput of the actual air makes a massive difference. When I first installed that particular one, I was getting, I think it was between sort of 20 degrees reduction in temperature, whereas the one behind me, it wasn't even quite 10 degrees reduction. So yeah, if I spent the top money on that particular heatsink and cooler, I would have been honestly very disappointed. So there's other things that can be sort of tweaked down. I'll look to do those in the future, and I'll share that with you guys, of course. So that's it for today's video. hopefully on screen at your end it won't be so long for you. It has been quite a long day here, kind of getting everything done. Lots of tinkering and sort of work around and stuff like that. It's also insanely hot in this office, so it makes it a little bit difficult to actually work with. But hopefully you've enjoyed watching, and you might have learned something along this particular way. So yeah, thanks a lot guys for watching. I appreciate your support and feedback. Any questions or comments, leave those in the box below and I'll be sure to get back to you guys. So till then,